Two households are compared under the same home price and mortgage assumptions for 30 years. One buys a $400,000 home. The other rents and invests the difference. The buyer puts down $80,000, pays about $1,981 a month in principal and interest, and over the life of the mortgage pays $393,000 in interest before owning the home free and clear. The renter never gets a deed. But the renter starts with $92,000 that did not go into a down payment and closing costs, then invests the monthly gap whenever renting is cheaper. In our base case, the buyer finishes about $189,000 ahead. Now, change only one benchmark input, the starting rent. Swap the Zillow-based starting rent for a lower alternative benchmark of $1,669. Same mortgage, same house price, same investment return, same 30 years. Now the renter finishes about $150,000 ahead. That is the problem with the sentence. Buying always wins. It is not math. It is an assumption. Most rent versus buy arguments compare rent to the mortgage payment. That is the wrong comparison. A mortgage payment is not the total cost of ownership. Rent is not the total opportunity cost of renting. The fair comparison is terminal net worth after both households face their full housing cash flows. For the buyer, we need the home value after 30 years, minus selling costs, minus any remaining mortgage balance, plus any money the owner had left over to invest later in the simulation. For the renter, we need the down payment and closing costs that were not spent, plus every monthly difference invested over time. So the question is not, is rent lower than the mortgage? The question is, after 30 years of cash flows, appreciation, inflation, and investment compounding, which balance sheet is larger? Here are the inputs and the sources behind them. For the mortgage rate, we use 6.30%, the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage average reported by Freddie Mac through FRED on April 30th, 2026. For the home price, we use around $400,000. That sits between two current market anchors. NAR reported a $408,800 median existing home sales price for March 2026, while Zillow reported a $365,545 typical U.S. home value. For rent, the base case uses $1,900 per month, close to Zillow's $1,910 typical U.S. rent. But the model also tests Realtor.com's $1,669 median, asking rent for 0 to 2-bedroom rentals in the largest metros. Those are not identical measures of the same unit mix. So we use them as alternate benchmarks, not as a perfectly apples-to-apples rent quote. For property tax, we use 0.888% based on NAHB's analysis of owner-occupied property taxes and property values. For maintenance, we use 1% of home value per year, which is deliberately conservative because common planning ranges go much higher. For investment return, we use 6% nominal, not as a forecast, but as a moderate net modeling assumption after acknowledging taxes, fees, and risk. Now, let us compute the first month. With a 20% down payment, the buyer borrows $320,000. At 6.3% over 30 years, the monthly principal and interest payment is $1,980.71. But that is not the full owner cost. Property tax adds about $296 in month 1. A 1% maintenance reserve adds about $333. A $2,400 annual insurance assumption adds another $200. So the owner's first-month housing cost is roughly $2,810. The renter pays $1,900. In a fair model, the renter does not just spend the difference. The renter invests the $910 monthly gap. The mortgage is not a flat economic object. It has a shape. The payment is fixed, but the composition changes. Early on, most of the payment is interest. Later, more of it becomes principal. At 6.3%, this buyer pays about $393,000 in total interest over 30 years. That number sounds brutal, and it is a real cost. But the mortgage payment also has one powerful feature. The principal and interest payment is fixed in nominal dollars. Rent, usually, is not. In the base case, rent grows at 3.5% per year as a long-run assumption, not as a statement about current 2026 rent conditions. Current March 2026 data are softer. Zillow's national rent measure was up 1.8% year over year, while Realtor.com's 0 to 2 bedroom metro measure was down 1.5% year over year. So the renter is cheaper in the early years, but under faster rent growth, the rent curve eventually climbs while the mortgage principal and interest line stays flat. Now, run the full 30 years. The house starts at $400,000. At 3.5% annual appreciation, it ends at about $1,122,000. If selling costs take 6% at the end, the net sale value is about $1,055,000. The mortgage balance is zero after 30 years. The owner also gets a small investment portfolio later in the simulation because after rent gets high enough, ownership becomes the cheaper monthly path. That portfolio ends near $98,000. So the owner's terminal net worth is about $1.153 million. The renter invests the $92,000 of avoided down payment and closing costs, plus the monthly differences, at 6% nominal. That portfolio ends near $963,000. Base case result, the buyer is ahead by about $189,000. But this is not a universal law. It is one coordinate in a multidimensional equation. Now we find the break-even point most people never calculate. Keep the $400,000 home, the 6.3% mortgage, the same tax, maintenance, appreciation, rent inflation, investment return, and selling cost. Then solve for the starting rent, where renting and buying end in the same place. In this model, the break-even starting rent is about $1,771 per month. That is a price-to-rent ratio of about 18.8, using annual rent. If comparable rent is below that level, renting and investing can win. If comparable rent is above that level, buying tends to win under these assumptions. At Realtor.com's alternative $1,669 rent benchmark, the model does not break even within 30 years. The renter finishes about $150,000 ahead. At $1,900, buying wins, but the holding period, break even, is around year 15. At $2,250, buying crosses the line in roughly 6 years. Starting rent is not the only variable that flips the answer. Rent growth matters too, and the base case is 3.5% is a long-run modeling assumption rather than a claim about current 2026 rent conditions. At the base rent of $1,900, the home appreciation break-even is roughly 2.25% per year. Above that, buying wins. Below that, renting can win. At 3.5% home appreciation, the investment return break-even is roughly 6.7%. If the renter earns meaningfully above that after taxes and fees, the renter can overtake the owner. If the renter earns less, the owner has a stronger path. Look at the grid. If investments return 4% and the home appreciates 3.5%, the owner finishes about $575,000 ahead. If investments return 6%, the owner is ahead by about $189,000. If investments return 8%, the renter is ahead by about $458,000. This does not mean renters should expect 8%. Investment returns are risky. Taxes matter, behavior matters. Many renters do not actually invest the difference, but mathematically, the outcome is not guaranteed by ownership alone. The next hidden variable is time. Buying has friction. In this model, the buyer pays $12,000 of closing costs at purchase and 6% transaction friction at sale. After 1 year, the owner is still about $36,000 behind the renter. After 5 years, the owner is still about $32,000 behind. After 10 years, still about $21,000 behind. The break-even happens around year 15. Selling cost matters. If exit friction were 0, this base model breaks even around year 7. With 6% selling cost, it breaks around year 15. With 8%, around year 18. This is why holding period changes the answer. A home can be a strong long-term wealth builder and still be a poor short-term trade. The model is clean, but real life is not. Mortgage interest deductions can help some buyers, but not all buyers itemize, and deduction limits matter. Property tax deductions are also limited by tax rules. That is why the base case sets tax benefits to 0 instead of pretending one household-specific tax answer is universal. HOA fees, utilities, special assessments, appliance failures, roof replacement, local insurance shocks, and climate risk can all change the ownership side. Rent control, moving flexibility, broker fees, security deposits, and lease volatility can change the renting side. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances shows that homeowners have much higher median net worth than renters and non-homeowners. But that fact is not the same as proving that buying any house at any price always wins. Homeowners often benefit from forced saving, leverage, and long holding periods. Renters only benefit from the model if the avoided cash actually gets invested and stays invested. So the honest conclusion is not anti-buying and not anti-renting. It is anti-slogan. Rent versus buy is not a yes or no question. It is a break-even surface. Comparable rent sets the starting line. Holding period determines whether transaction costs have time to fade. Home appreciation and rent growth assumptions shape the ownership advantage. Investment returns shape the renter's opportunity cost. Maintenance, taxes, insurance, and selling friction decide how much of the gross return survives. In our base case, buying wins after roughly 15 years and finishes about $189,000 ahead. But under a lower alternate rent benchmark from a different rental data set, renting and investing wins by about $150,000. Same model, different inputs, different answer. That is the math behind the decision. This is Quantly, the math behind every market, educational only, not financial advice.